Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to our Bible study called Revelation. It's a study of prophecy and the end times, where we're not just studying the book of Revelation, we're looking at all of the end times events that the Bible actually teaches us about and talks about. We have been going through verse by verse the study of the book of Daniel. And in our study of the book of Daniel, when it comes to the end times events, we have seen 5 visions that Daniel was a part of. Now, 4 of those were given directly to Daniel. One was given to King Nebuchadnezzar, but Daniel was a part of it because he helped interpret the vision or interpret the prophetic dream that was given to Nebuchadnezzar. All of these things are revolving around the Middle East. All of the empires, all of the end times events happen around what is modern day Iran, Iraq, modern day Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, the area of Jordan. All of these areas are part of the end times events because they were part of the kingdoms that were referred to in the times of Daniel. So it just makes sense that all of the things that happened then, it's going to be the same region and the same area. The same players are really going to be a part of a lot of it, which is a lot of the Middle Eastern nations. Now, all of this is focused on this tiny little country of Israel. Israel is a small country in the comparison with the countries and the empires in the world, yet it demands most of the world's attention and most of the world's focus. And we have seen that through events that have happened in recent days that have happened around Israel and the conflicts that they are having, and that's only going to get worse as we move forward. In fact, in the United Nations, the number one country that has had resolutions passed against it or some kind of judgments passed against it has always been Israel. Israel is in the forefront, even though Israel is a peaceful country, even though they are technologically advanced, even though they share their technology freely with others, even though they are welcoming to people in their country, they are still the one that is under attack more than any other country. Well, let's jump into the book of Daniel and let's look at it together as we understand the events. So, this is going to be the final day where we are going to wrap up the study of Daniel, and all of these things are helping us to gain the picture of what the end times events are going to be all about. And so, let's look at this together and let's look at the outline once again. So the final tribulation is given to Daniel by an angel. Now, this angel comes to Daniel in a vision, and he gives Daniel the events that are going to happen. And we saw that in chapter 11, starting in really it starts in chapter 10. All of this final vision is chapter 10 through 12. But in chapter 10 and in chapter 11, the first half of it is really historical information. Chapter 10 is the context of the events that are happening, that an angel would come to him. The angel was in spiritual conflict and in spiritual battle with the demonic forces, but this angel finally got to Daniel so that he could give Daniel the end times events and the end times vision that God wanted Daniel to know. Then it goes into chapter 11. Chapter 11 is the breakdown of the events that are going to happen, historical events. For Daniel, they were all future events. For us, historical events that happen in the time of the Greek Empire. The Greek Empire, which was represented in a prior vision that Daniel had had, this vision of the goat that was coming from the west toward the east, who would take over from the Medo-Persian Empire. After Alexander the Great died, there were 4 kingdoms that rose up in his place, and all of that conflict between those kingdoms happens in chapter 11 all the way through verse 19. Then in verse 20 of chapter 11, we see a tax collector rising up who's going to exact tribute. Now, I believe that's my personal interpretation there, is that I believe that that is the Ottoman Empire, because that is the events that happen. It's really the things that the Muslim empires do when they come into a country. They exact tribute, and you could read historical documents about them exacting tribute. In fact, there is a famous story in U.S. history about a U.S. ship that went and encountered off of the Barbary coast, and they encountered this Muslim empire, the pirates that were there, and they held their ship and they held a lot of their crew until tribute was paid. And the U.S. came to that stance, that very famous stance, that we will not pay terrorists. We will not pay a tribute for something that is a terrorist act. So this chapter 11 verse 20 seems like, to me, in my opinion, that it is the Muslim Empire, because that's what they were notorious for. Starting in chapter 11, verse 21, we saw the before the tribulation events. Now, the before the tribulation events were very important to understand. These before the events were the leading up. There is a lot of jockeying that is taking place. There's a lot of alliances that are happening. There's a lot of defeat that is happening, and this whole thing of before the tribulation is really the picture of the rise of not only the rise of the Antichrist, but it is also the rise of the Antichrist empire. The empire is going to be formed. So this is something that has not happened that we will be watching for. There will be this Confederacy of Nations, the Confederacy of Nations that will occur. Confederacy of Nations that will occur, that will be a joining of nations. There will be a group of 10 that will join up and rise up together. They will form alliances. They will coalesce into an empire. That empire will be taken over by the person known as the little horn, the Antichrist, an insignificant person who will rise to power. He will have no pedigree. He will have no, standing. He will have no status. He will not come out of a royal family. He will just rise up, and he will conquer 3 of the 10 nations. When those 3 are conquered, the other 7 will fall to him, and he will become the leader of this incredibly powerful beastly empire that will happen in the Middle East and stir up the Middle East conflicts that will occur. Again, look at the areas around the Middle East of Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Jordan, Syria, into some of the Stan nations that we have referred to before, maybe even going over into Pakistan on the eastern border into that part. This will be the rise of that Middle Eastern powerful beast, this powerful empire that will occur. Once the events happen before the tribulation, you will see the events that will happen during the tribulation. Now, one of the events that will happen before the tribulation is not only this confederacy, but also the temple being rebuilt. The temple has to be rebuilt in order to fulfill everything that God had promised would be fulfilled, because during the tribulation is where the temple comes into play. During the tribulation is where Jerusalem is really going to be under attack. But it's not just Jerusalem, it will be all Israel, but it will focus primarily on Jerusalem because Jerusalem has been the center of the nation. It has been the high place of the nation. It's been the place where God's temple would dwell. It's God's holy city. That's the place that these events will occur. Now, there will be a peace that will occur with Israel and this beastly empire. There will be some kind of an agreement that is made. They will come to some kind of an understanding, to the point that Israel lets its guard down and says, we feel peace, we feel secure, we don't worry, we're not worried, we don't have to build up walls anymore, we don't have to put bars on our windows anymore, we feel at peace. Once that happens, once Israel feels secure, once the temple is built, once the confederacy, the empire of the Antichrist has been established, now things will really kick into high gear. During the tribulation, what's going to happen is you have the before events that will happen here. You have all of these events that will happen before the tribulation, and that's all of these things. It's the Israel feeling at peace, the temple being rebuilt, the Confederacy of Nations, the empire being established, the rise of the Antichrist. So the rise of the Antichrist will happen in that time. And then you come to the big pivotal point, and this is the point that Jesus really centers in on. This is the time called the Great Trouble, the Great Tribulation. I've said it before, but in the Old Testament, this is a time that is referred to as Jacob's trouble. Now, Jacob is a reference to Israel itself. Jacob was the name of the man who was the father of the 12 tribes. Jacob was the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. Jacob was the twin. Esau was his brother. Esau battled with Jacob. There was strife that happened between Jacob in the same way that Isaac, who was Jacob's father, he battled with his stepbrother, whose name was Ishmael. So there has been this history. There's Ishmael and there's Isaac, and there's conflict between the two. Then there was Esau, and there was Jacob. Esau shouldn't, yeah, that's a U. Esau and Jacob, and there was conflict between the two. Now, these two represent Israel, and the other two grew to be the Arab nations. They grew to be the Middle Eastern nations. So, from the very beginning of time, from the very beginning of Genesis, after the flood, these groups have always been at conflict, and there's still conflict. So the middle point in the tribulation, during the tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, is where the Antichrist will come in. He will break the treaty, break the agreement that he has made with Israel, and he will turn on Israel and he will attack Israel. Israel will be devastated. That's why Jesus says, when this happens, when you see this catalytic event called the Abomination of Desolation, and Jesus said, if you don't know what the abomination of desolation is, go read the book of Daniel, because the book of Daniel will tell you exactly what the abomination of desolation is. So what was it? Well, that is the time where the Antichrist will go into the temple of God and declare himself to be God. He will stop all of the practices. He will stop the worship of Yahweh God, and he will set up his own reign as God. He will consider himself a god. He will speak with boastful words. He will then also give orders to kill, hurt, destroy, capture, plunder all of Jerusalem, and then all other parts of Israel as well. So this will be the time of Jacob's trouble. It will be a great tribulation, a time that the world has never seen. Israel has gone through hard times. They have gone through difficulties many, many times in life. You look at World War II, the things that happened to them during the Nazi reign in World War II, the numbers of Jews that were killed during that horrific Holocaust that happened. That will pale in comparison to the events that will happen during the time of Jacob's trouble, during the time of great tribulation, that is all kicked into gear by the abomination of desolation. So we talked last time about all of those events that happened during the tribulation, and now we're going to turn our focus to the events that happen on the tail end of the tribulation. What happens here at the end of the tribulation? What happens at the end of the 3.5 year period of time that has occurred since the time of the abomination of desolation and the end times events? So what is going to happen after the tribulation? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. And so let's jump in and let's just read chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, and let's just break it apart verse by verse, word by word, and see what events come next that Daniel is being warned about. So here's what it says. Now, again, just go back and read for yourself chapters 10, 11, and 12 so that you can understand the flow of everything. So what happens at the very end of during the tribulation events is that the Antichrist will do incredible damage to Israel, but the Antichrist will not be okay because he will hear reports from the east and from the north that will alarm him, and he will set out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. So think of it this way. An animal being trapped into a corner is going to retaliate in great rage. So Hitler's final days, the numbers of Jews that were killed in the final days of Hitler's reign were enormous. They outweighed every other time. They raged at the very end, and that's what will happen with the Antichrist. At the very end of all of these events, he will hear a report from the north and the east, which will most likely be the armies of China, or it could be the armies of Russia, or it could be allied troops of some kind coming in against the Antichrist. And this will alarm him so much so that he will take out his rage on all of Israel and kill every Jew that you possibly can before this enemy army comes against us. He will pitch his tents between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. That is the area of modern day Tel Aviv. where the airport, Ben Gurion International Airport, is. He will set up his base camp there, and he will do incredible damage, but he will meet his doom. The Antichrist will come to an end. He will meet his doom. He will not win. He will meet his doom, but in the meantime, he will do incredible damage. What I have said before is that all of the world will be caught up in this chaos. But not all of the world will follow the Antichrist. There will be people who will stand up against what he is doing. Most of what is happening is dealing with the nation of Israel. That is the center point. It is the epicenter of all of the events that will happen. The world will be a mess. The world will be in chaos. There could be battles everywhere. There could be nuclear battles everywhere. There could be great distress that will happen everywhere. We know that's the case because of what the book of Revelation is going to teach us. But not everybody will be on board and not everybody will be following him. There will be armies that will come against him and they will battle with him and he will meet his doom with no one to help him. That's the last lines of chapter 11. So what does it say after the tribulation? Well, let's look at this. So at that time, what is that time? This is the end of the seven. This is the end of the 7 years. This is the end of the final week that Daniel had the vision of in chapter 9, where there was the 70-week prophecy. This is the final week, the final 7-year period, the final heptad, the groupings of 7. At the end, at that time, Michael. Now, who is Michael? Michael is the great prince of Israel. He is the angelic archangel of Israel. He is the one who oversees Israel. Michael, the great prince, he is an angel. He is an archangel, and he is the really the key angel that is being discussed in the Bible. At that time, Michael, the archangel, the great prince, who stands guard over the sons of your people. So he is the one who is been appointed to stand guard over the nation of Israel. Who are your people? Well, again, he's giving it to Daniel, and who is Daniel's people? That is Israel. He stands guard over Israel. At that time, he will arise. So up to that point, he has been basically sitting on the sidelines watching all of these events take place. So at the end, Michael will arise. He will stand up. He's going to stand up, and now he is going to bring the conclusion. There will be a time of distress such as has never occurred since the beginning of the nation until then. There will be a time of distress, such as has never occurred since the beginning of the nation until the end. What has Israel gone through as a nation? Well, they have been conquered many, many times. They have been conquered by the Babylonians. They have been conquered by the Romans. They have been conquered by the Greek Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire. Israel was annihilated at the end of the Roman Empire, the Roman reign of Israel. Well, I guess it wasn't the end of the Roman Empire, but they were annihilated in 70 AD. Many were killed, many were destroyed during that time. They would go from 70 AD all the way until the 1940s with no nation. In the 1940s, World War II, they were annihilated and went through an incredibly horrible Holocaust. So think of all of the things that have happened to the nation of Israel in their lifetime, and then start to think that time of distress that they've had over their history is nothing compared to the thing that they're going to experience at the end. There will be a time of distress such as has never occurred since the beginning of the nation until then. Until the time of the end, nothing compares to what Israel has had to go through, what Israel will have to go through. They will go through a time of such distress, such as has never been seen on the face of the earth toward the Israelites. But here's the good news. But at that time, your people, who are your people? Israel. Your people, Israel. Everyone who is found written in the book. What book is he talking about? He's talking about the Lamb's book of life. And we will learn more about that as we get into the book of Revelation. The Lamb's book of life has every name recorded in it who has given their hearts and their lives to Jesus. Your people Israel. An interesting study is the idea and the concept of what is truly Israel. Israel is not a nation. It is a nation, but it's not really a nation. We think of Israel being a nation with borders, just being a country, but that's not really what Israel is. Israel, according to the book of Romans, Romans chapter 11, Israel would be all followers of God of all time. We become part of the nation of Israel when we accept Jesus as our Savior. In the book of Romans, in Romans chapter 11, it describes Israel being like an olive tree. So think of an olive tree. That's a crude drawing of a tree, but just picture it as a tree. And in the book of Romans, it says that the natural branches were broken off. Who are the natural branches? Those are born with an Israeli background. They're born with a pedigree. They're born into to the culture. They're born with that blood running through their veins. They were naturally a, a part of the nation of Israel, but they were broken off because they didn't believe in Jesus. But if you believe in Jesus, you will be grafted in. You will be a wild olive branch that will be cut into this tree, wrap put around it, and you will start to naturally grow in the tree of Israel. So who is the nation of Israel? That is all followers of God who have accepted Jesus as Lord. And so what is he referring to up here? But at that time, your people, Israel, the real Israel, everyone who is found, whose name is written in the book of life, they are the ones that will be delivered. Not all Israel will be delivered. Only the spiritual nation of Israel, which are the ones who have accepted Christ. The ones who have accepted Christ at that time will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep, that means multitudes who have died already and they're laying in the dust of the earth, they will awaken. Everybody will come back. They will awaken to life. Some of them to everlasting life, and others of them to shame and everlasting contempt. So notice that what's going to happen at the end. At the very end, every soul will come back to life, no matter how long they have been dead, no matter where they are in the dust of the earth, they will awaken. And when they are awakening, they will be judged. They will be judged on what they did with Jesus. What opportunities was given to them? Well, that is after Jesus died, he descended and gave opportunities to people to come to Christ. He gave opportunities for all who are born to come to him. When everyone who has died wakes up, you will be then judged. And the result of the judgment is that some will go to everlasting life and others will go to shame and everlasting contempt. Now, I want you to notice these words: everlasting, everlasting. Do you ever wonder if hell and heaven are truly forever? Well, God seems to indicate that they are. They are everlasting. People who don't come to Christ in their life will find everlasting contempt. People who come to Christ will find everlasting life. Therefore, it is imperative that we make a decision for Christ and we help lead others to a decision for Christ. It's not for our sake. It's not for our benefit. We don't get a commission on how many people come to Christ. It is for their sake and their benefit, because we love people, because we care about people's eternal soul. We warn people because we don't want to see them going to everlasting contempt. So at the end, Michael, who has been waiting, will stand up, and Michael will, who is guard over the people of Israel, he will arise. Again, who is your people? You could think of that as even the spiritual nation of Israel, which we are a part of if we've accepted Christ. He will stand up and arise. There will be a time of distress that Israel has never seen in their history. It will be unprecedented chaos that Israel will be going through. But at that time, what is the time? It is the very end time. That's when the decisions will be made. At that time, everyone will be delivered who was a part of the spiritual nation of Israel, whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. They will be delivered. Multitudes who are already dead will awaken. And when they will awaken, the final judgment will occur. Some will go to everlasting life, and some will go to everlasting contempt. Now, those who are wise, now who would be the ones who would be considered wise? Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of heavenly expanse. Who are the ones that are called to shine? That is the Christian. That is somebody who has accepted Christ into their life. What does Jesus say? No one puts their light in a basket. Instead, they put it on a lampstand so that all can see. You will shine. The ones who are wise. Who are the wise? It's the ones who have followed Christ, who are his disciples, who have accepted him. The wise ones will shine. In the darkness of what is going to happen in the destruction of Israel, the chaos of our world, the Christian will shine. And you will shine like the brightness of the heavenly expanse. And those who turn many to righteousness will be like the stars forever and ever. So that's our goal. Our goal is to turn many to righteousness, many people following Christ, many people coming to him. So the end events, the final moments, Michael will stand up and he will arise over his nation that he is in charge of. He will arise over the true Israel. Who are the true Israel? Those are any who have accepted Christ. Whether you are a Gentile or whether you are born as a Jew, you will be grafted into the nation of Israel. This becomes your heritage. It becomes your nation. This is why we should actually care about this, because Israel is our nation if we've accepted Christ. Michael will rise up and he will then fight for Israel. During the time, distress, chaos, unlike ever seen before, but the ones whose names are in the Lamb's book of life, they will be delivered. All of the people who have died will wake up, and some will be judged and go to everlasting life, and the others will go to everlasting contempt. If you're a wise follower, believer in Christ, if you have been a spiritually grafted into the nation of Israel, you will be someone who in the darkness of the world around you, you don't let the darkness overwhelm you, you overwhelm the darkness. You will shine like the stars in the heaven, like the heavenly expanse. And if you will turn many, you will be blessed like the stars forever and ever. So those are the details after the tribulation. Now let's go into the final little section in the book of Daniel and understand the final little picture that is going to be given. Chapter 12, verses 4 through 13 are going to be giving us more details about the tribulation, and these are just the wrap-up details that Daniel was given about what's going to happen toward the end. And so I'm going to break this down for you in the final details about the tribulation. Let's look at this together. Let's start with verse 4. In verse 4, we're given the command, or Daniel is given the command to seal the vision. So the vision is now being given. The vision is over. Daniel's been given a command to seal up the vision. And so let's read this. But you, Daniel, I want you to close up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. So Daniel is still having that conversation with the angel. The angel is the one who's given him this vision after the entire vision has been given of the events that are going to happen leading up to the tribulation, to the before events of the tribulation, the during the events, the after events. Now, I want you to close up the words. I want you to seal the book. Now, just notice this: seal the book until the time of the end. So the seal is potentially related to the seals in the book of Revelation. Now, this is again just speculation. This is my maybe my opinion or maybe my thought process, but the words of the book of the end have been sealed until the seals are broken, and now all of this starts to come together and all of this starts to coalesce and make sense. Bible scholars and theologians and just ordinary people from the time of Daniel until our time, a lot of the things in the book of Daniel just don't make sense. They're kind of they don't really come together. But now, in the end, and we feel like we are more and more in the end times just by looking at world events around us and the things that are happening in Israel, we know that until 1948, when Israel became a nation, none of these things could have possibly happened. That's why World War II could not have been the end times events. But from the time of history, from the time of Daniel till the time of Jesus when he came on the scene, and he was the fulfillment of the 70 weeks, or the coming of the Messiah part of that, the 69 weeks. Then you had at 70 A.D. Israel was gone; it was destroyed. The end times events could not happen without Israel. Israel has to be back in existence. In 1948. Israel came back into existence as a nation. God fulfilled prophetic statements that he had made in the Old Testament about bringing this nation back to life. And we've looked at those. We've looked at all of those events that brought Israel back as a nation and how incredible that thing is and how much that is part of God's timeline. And as Israel was brought back into nation as a nation, now the events are getting ready for the end times things to occur. So now all of the things are in place, and now you have the very final end. And when that little timeline kicks off, we don't know. But that final 7-year period is capable now because of Israel coming back as a nation. And they had to come back as a nation. They will have to have peace. They will have to have the temple of God, and you will have to see the rise of the beastly empire. So Daniel, seal up the book until the time of the end. When people start looking at it in the time of the end and it makes sense, then we know it's about time. We know we are right around the corner. How will we know when we're in the time of the end? Well, let me tell you, Daniel, here's how you're going to know. Very different from your society today, but in the end, many will run back and forth and knowledge will increase. So to ask yourself this question, is that accurate today? Do many run back and forth today? With technology, with the ability to have transportation, with the ability for flight, with the ability for high-speed trains, cars. You look at the ability to travel on ship if you need to, but that's not even the primary way anymore. But many are running back and forth. We are always running back and forth today. That is a description of where we are at as a society today. Many will run back and forth, always on the go. People don't live together in family units anymore the way that they always had throughout all of Earth's history. Now they live separated, apart from family, and we are constantly on the run, going here and there, back and forth all the time. We are always on the run. We are going on the run even in our own communities, but we are especially traveling broadly overseas as often as we get. And not only will they run back and forth, but knowledge will increase. Since the late 1800s, early 1900s, knowledge has increased more than ever before in all of the history of the world. In fact, from the time of Jesus all the way up until probably the early 1800s, things really didn't change that much. They were doing the same things. Little technologies would happen. There were new advances, but they were not significant advances. They were, think of the printing press. That was pretty significant. But there were not a lot of advances culturally until you got to the late 1800s, early 1900s, where technology just skyrocketed. Now look at where we are. If you were to transport somebody into our culture today that had lived in the time of Jesus, they would be blown away. They couldn't even fathom the things that we see before us today. So what will happen in the end? Well, Daniel, in the end, many are going to run back and forth. Always on the run, always on the go. Transportation and travel will become tremendous and knowledge will increase. So, could we be near the end? Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but could we be in the final decades? Could we be in the final century? Could we be in the final handful of years in our lifetime? Sooner? The next 5 years, the next 10 years, the next 20 years? Could these things happen? Absolutely, they could. We are fitting all of the things that the Bible warned about would happen as we approach the end. All of the warnings that Jesus gave in Matthew 24, the first birth pangs warnings, combined with the things that Daniel saw, combined with the things that John saw in the book of Revelation, really point to the fact that we are very, very close. We are on the precipice of the end times events occurring. So that is the command that is given to seal up the vision. Daniel, please seal up the vision. That's all I'm going to tell you for now, Daniel. You're not going to make sense. It's not going to make sense to you. You're not going to understand it. It's going to be well beyond you. You close up the books. You close up all of the vision until the time of the end. And how will you know you're in the time of the end? Well, the transportation, the travel, many will run back and forth. Knowledge will increase greatly. Well, let's keep going. Then there is the length and the severity of the tribulation. How long and how severe is the tribulation going to be? Well, let me give you a little bit more of a detail the angel is going to tell to Daniel. So let's look at this together. Daniel chapter 12, verses 5 through 7, it goes on to say this. Then I, Daniel, so Daniel's talking about himself. Then I, Daniel, I looked, and behold, there were two others that stood there, one on this bank of the river and one on the other bank of the river. One said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, he asked him this question. And I just want you to notice this question because this is going to be important. How long until the end of the wondrous things? In other words, how long until the end of the things that I just showed you and the things that that has been described to Daniel? How long is it going to be? How long is all of this is going to take? How long until the end? Then I heard the man clothed in linen and who was above the waters of the river, and he raised both his right and his left hands toward heaven, and he swore an oath. When you swear an oath in the Bible, that means it is guaranteed. He swore an oath, and the oath that he swore was by him, by the Lord who lives forever. And here's what his oath said. It is for a time, times, and half a time. Then, when the breaking of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all of these things will be finished. So that gives you the clue. All of the things will be finished. When? When the breaking of the power of the holy people. So here's what he's talking about. When is this time of great tribulation? How long will this time of great trouble, of great tribulation, how long is this going to last? Now, this is things that Jesus was talking about. He talked about the Great Tribulation. How long is this going to last? Well, it's going to last a time, times, and half a time. What is times, time, and half a time? Well, that's this. 2 years. I'm sorry, 1 year. That's a time. Times, that's 2 years. And half a time, that's half a year. What does that equal to? 3.5 years. How long will this trouble last? Well, it will last for a period of 3.5 years. Then at the end, it will be finished. When will it be finished? when the breaking of the power of the holy people comes to an end. 3.5 years, Israel is being allowed to be broken. 3.5 years, there is trouble that is being allowed. 3.5 years, there is not only Israel is broken, but there is going to be incredible persecution that will happen upon believers as well. For 3.5 years, this is how long all of this is going to last. So how long, the question was asked, until the wondrous things come to pass? Well, it's going to be a total of 3.5 years. This will be the time. Before the 3.5 years, the first half of Daniel's final 70th week, that will be a time of preparation, of things jockeying into position and things coming into place. But once the abomination of desolation begins, and the temple is desolated, and the Antichrist takes up his seat in the temple, the Antichrist sits and declares himself to be God, you are in for a 3.5 year final time of breaking events that are going to happen. 3.5 years that Israel will be broken, that Christians will be persecuted, that Jews will be persecuted, especially in Israel, but all around the world. The world will turn against Israel, and the world will turn against Christians, who will be persecuted alongside of Israel being persecuted. Then all of these things will be finished. When will all of these things finish? When the 3.5 years is up, when the power of the holy people, the breaking of the power of the holy people, comes to an end. So for 3.5 years, there will be a breaking that will happen. So that's the question. How long is this going to last? Well, it's going to be 3.5 years. That's the answer. The length is going to be 3.5 years. The severity is going to be a breaking of the people. The breaking of their backs, the breaking of their country, the breaking of their spirit, the breaking of them in the form of death. There will be a breaking that will happen, and then at the end of that breaking event, all of these things will come to an end. That's at the end of the 3.5 year period. So if we are going to be raptured at the end of the events, which is what my belief is based upon what I read in Scripture. People can argue that, but I believe that that's the only conclusion that Scripture really points to. At the end of those events, that is where Daniel or Matthew chapter 24 ties in, and that is where at that moment, at that time, they will see the Lord returning on the clouds, and he will gather up his people from one ends of the earth to the other, and he will take them to be with him forever. Okay, let's wrap this up with a couple final thoughts. One is the sealed purpose of the tribulation, and let's look at that next. What is the sealed purpose of this tribulation? So let's look. The sealed purpose of the tribulation will be covered in chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. So here's what he said to Daniel. Now, Daniel says, I heard all of this, but I did not understand. And again, why wouldn't Daniel understand? Well, because he is so far removed from these events that he can't even fathom what's going on. He has just been given this vision that he can't wrap his brain around, and he doesn't even understand what our culture and our world is going to look like at that time. So none of these things are going to be understanding to him. I didn't understand. So I said, my Lord, now this is not a reference to this guy being a god, but my Lord. In other words, this angel calls him my Lord. I'm your servant. I'm humbled before you. What will be the outcome? What is the outcome? What is going to happen? What is going to be the final product that is going to happen? What is the result of all of these things that are going to happen during the 3.5 year period? What is the outcome? Why is this happening? What is the purpose of all of this? Well, the angel didn't really give a good explanation, but he gave some explanation. Here's what he said. The angel then said to Daniel, "Go your way, Daniel." In other words, you don't need to worry about it, Daniel. It's going to be so far removed from you. You're not going to be a part of it. Don't worry about it. The words are closed up and they're sealed until the time of the end. So all of these things that Daniel's receiving, these are future events that will happen at the end. Why? Some people believe Daniel was already fulfilled, or that it was fulfilled in 70 AD. It can't be, because the end didn't happen. These are for the end events, where the world comes to an end and the world sees Jesus returning on the clouds. That's the end. The words, Daniel, that you have been given are closed up, and they are sealed until the time of the end. Now, here's the purpose. Here is the outcome. What is the outcome? Well, here's the start of the outcome right here. The outcome is this, that why are people going through this? What is going to happen? Well, many will be purified. This will be the ultimate byproduct. As people go through these events, they're going to be purified. You know how you purify metal? You've probably heard this before, but metal is melted to an extremely high temperature, and as metal is melted, it causes all of the dross, all of the bad product and parts of the metal to rise to the surface so that that part can be scraped away. And they will heat up this metal to incredibly hot temperatures so that all of the gold or all of the silver is finally made pure. That's how they make it pure. They want it to be 100% pure. Well, what will happen to us during this great time of tribulation and this great time of trial and trouble? We will be made pure, because that's what these things will do. The world will heat up to the point that all of our impurities will rise to the surface, and we will be left refined, walking with Christ alone. We will have no choice but to walk with him or to reject him. There won't be any middle ground. It is going to be difficult. It is going to be tough, but we will be purified in the process. But not only will we be purified, we will also be made, oh, I'm sorry, that was the wrong color there. We will be made spotless. We will be purified, and we will be made spotless, and we will be refined. That's what happens during trials. Trials have a way of heating us up, and when we are heated up, all of our impurities will rise to the surface. When our impurities rise to the surface, God removes those things so that what is left is a refined, pure, and spotless metal, or a refined, pure, and spotless person. The wicked will act wickedly. None of the wicked are going to understand this. None of the wicked will understand the events, Daniel, that I am just telling you about. It won't make sense. They will not get it. But the ones who are wise, you will understand. As you see world events happening around us and you hear the descriptions that Daniel has been giving us, then you know that these events make sense. You know that the Bible makes sense because you can see it unfolding before your very eyes. You're wise, and you will understand. And it's going to take people who are willing to be committed to say, I will not follow the beast. I will not follow his influence. I will not follow his empire. I will not take his mark upon me. The mark of the beast will have nothing to do with what the vaccine. It will have nothing to do with what we have assumed it's going to be. The mark of the beast will be the beast's mark. It will be the Antichrist's mark. He is not on the scene, so you can't possibly take the mark of the beast until he is on the scene. You will have a choice to make at that time. You will be either sealed by God or you will be sealed by the Antichrist. At the end, we who are wise, and I'm including you in that discussion, we will understand. You will understand. It's all making sense. It's all coming together. You're seeing it all happen because you have the wisdom that comes from Christ alone. Now, one final couple of thoughts here. One final thought, not couple of thoughts. One final thought, and here's what it is. The transitional days after the tribulation. Here's what it says. Okay, so one final thought when it comes to closing out the book of Daniel, and then one concluding sentence after this. But Daniel chapter 12, verses 11 through 12, he gives a timeline, and this is about the transitional days after the tribulation. Now he's going to throw out a number here, and the number is going to be important. And how this is going to work, I honestly cannot tell you. This is this is one of those mysterious things that are being talked about. So I want to put the timeline. This is the 3.5 year Great Tribulation timeline. And so we have the beginning, the 3.5 years to the end, and that is a total of 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. Now, how are those days calculated? Well, in the Hebraic calendar, it's 360 days. It's 30-day months. It's not like we have in the Gregorian calendar. It's 360 days, 30 days per month, times 12 months is 360 days. That times the 3.5 years is going to come out to the 1,260 days that is being talked about. That's the timeline. You have the entire 7-year period is going to be a period of 2,520 days. So look at what it says. From the time, so from the time that the daily burnt offering is taken away and abomination of desolation is set up. So this is one and the same event. When the abomination of desolation event is set up, and at the same moment, the burnt offerings or the normal temple procedures are taken away. So the burnt offerings are removed. That sacrificial system is now gone. The abomination of desolation happens. The Antichrist seats himself in the temple in God's temple, the center of God's temple, and says, I am God, I am to be worshipped. And so this is the abomination of desolation event. All of the structure, all of the times, all of the traditions are all thrown out the window. When the Antichrist does this abomination of desolation event, that daily burnt offering is taken away. So from that moment where the burnt offering is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, so that's that same moment in time right there, there will be 1,290 days. 1,290 days would be the 1,260 plus 30. So from that event, you can add on here, there's going to be another 30 days. What is going to happen in those 30 days? I don't know. I have no idea. It's interesting, though, to note that now there is another number being thrown. There's 1,260 days plus an additional 30 days on top of that. But happy is the one who keeps waiting and reaches the 1,335 days. So now what has he done? He's added on top of that now another 45 days. So what that says is this, that from the 1,260 days that there is a gap in here, and the gap will amount to a total of 75 days that the Lord could possibly return anytime in that window, or we could be gathered anytime in that window. There's just a gap of time. So from the 1,260 days, that's the beginning of the tribulation to the end of the tribulation, is going to be the total of 1,260 days. But from the end of the tribulation, there's this mysterious 75 days that we are called to wait and keep waiting. And so it's not going to be neat and clean that it's going to Jesus is automatically going to return at that moment, or that we are going to be gathered at that moment. It could happen anywhere in that 75 days. It could be that we are gathered here and that we come back with Jesus here. It could be that that the Lord waits and doesn't return for that time. It could be any number of things. We don't know, but it's just this mysterious gap of time. So here's Daniel has laid it out this way. He's laid it out as a final 7-year period. The final 7 years would be 1,200 or 2,520 days. And so from that time of the 2,520 days, you will have the midpoint. Now the midpoint will be the beginning of the 1,260 days. That's the 3.5 years. This will be the abomination of desolation event, and it will be the time that he says here that the burnt offering is taken away. You're going to have, this will be the 1,260, plus you're going to have an additional gap of 30 days plus an additional gap of 45 days. Blessed is the one who waits during this time, because this time is going to be key. What's going to happen there? We don't know because it doesn't say. It doesn't say exactly what's going to happen, but it says that we are blessed and happy if we keep waiting and uh, we reach that 1335. Maybe that is the final, absolute final. We don't know. We also know that it may be hard at that end to really know what the days are. So, Jesus said, no one knows the day or the hour. We can have a pretty good general idea. We can have a pretty good general guess because he gave us every specific detail and event that we need to know to have a pretty good guess. But if you think about that time, there will be no sun that is shining because maybe it's a nuclear winter kind of a thing. Maybe the all the chaos and the events that have happened in the world, maybe some of the judgment events that have taken place. The earth will just be pummeled. Clocks may not be working correctly. You may not be able to see the sun because the sun is blotted out because of like I said, the nuclear winter kind of thing that could potentially be happening. So you may be thrown off. You may not even know exactly what the time and the countdown is, where we are in that day, but you know that it's close. You know that it could be any minute, any day. So be ready, be prepared, especially when you get toward the end of those end times events. Okay, so one final thought out of Daniel, and this is just a little bit of an encouragement. This is how we're going to close this today. It's just the encouragement to Daniel. And so the final tribulation events are just, hey, let's seal up the vision, seal it up until the end. How do you know when it's going to be the end? Well, people are going to be traveling back and forth, moving back and forth, and knowledge is going to increase greatly. Well, that's kind of where we're at today. You see the length and the severity of the tribulation. It will happen until Israel is broken. And then after that event, after all of Israel's broken, the power of Israel has been broken, then the end will occur. All of these things will be finished. Well, what's the purpose? It is to purify, make spotless, and to refine the people. The wicked will not understand this, but the people will be being refined through the persecution, looking for the return of the Lord. Then there is the transitional days. There's this gap of 30 and another 45 days, and we're not really sure exactly what that's going to be, but there's a timeline at the end that we're just not going to know what's going to happen, but we're waiting those 75 days, those extra, 2.5 months to figure out what is exactly going to happen. We're waiting, we're watching, we're planning, and then there's the final encouragement, and here's the final encouragement. Daniel, but you go your way to the end. Daniel, you're not going to know anymore. You're not going to have to worry about it again. You have sealed up the vision. Daniel, your time is done. So you go and you rest. Then at the end of days, you will arise and you will receive your portion, Daniel. Because why? Everybody, it was already warned that at the end at the end, if your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, when you come back to life, when you awake to life, that some will go into everlasting life, some into everlasting punishment and everlasting turmoil. Daniel, your job is done. You have given everything you need to give. You have heard everything you need to hear. You go ahead and just rest until your final days, Daniel. And then when you die, you will go to heaven to be with me. But at the end, you will arise the same way that everybody who has already died will awaken again, and you will receive your portion, your blessing. You will receive the gift of God's eternal life and eternal grace for yourself. Well, that's the book of Daniel. Next time, we are going to jump into the book of Revelation and turn there and match up and marry the book of Daniel with the book of Revelation and the teachings of Jesus out of Matthew. Hopefully, this has been very helpful to your understanding of the end times events. According to the book of Daniel, it helps to bring light to what Jesus said in Matthew 24, and it will bring incredible light to what the book of Revelation speaks to our hearts. So I will see you next time. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for spending your time with me.